White heavy checkmark disclaimer: this story is a dramatized fictional narrative inspired by real emotional experiences. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real-life events is purely coincidental. The content may contain sensitive themes including emotional betrayal, relationships, and infidelity. Viewer discretion is advised. This story is intended for mature audiences and aims to highlight the emotional complexity of human relationships. They say when life feels too perfect, that's when you should be most afraid. I used to laugh at that. Back then, I had everything I ever dreamed of. A stable job, a cozy little house in the suburbs, and a husband who loved me. His name was James, and he was the kind of man women prayed for. Kind, attentive, and steady. We had been married for 5 years, and although we didn't have kids yet, we were planning to start trying soon. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was full of quiet moments that made my heart feel full. Sunday mornings with coffee and no alarms. Long walks around the neighborhood. Inside jokes that never grew old. James had a best friend named Ethan. They'd known each other since college and were practically like brothers. Ethan was always around, especially during holidays and football nights. He was the fun one, charming, quick-witted, the life of every room. I liked him. Everyone did. He could talk to anyone about anything and somehow make you feel like the most important person in the room. But I never thought much beyond that. To me, Ethan was James's best friend, and by extension, he was like family. Looking back now, I realized there were things I didn't see or refused to see. The way Ethan's eyes lingered on me a second longer than they should have. The way his compliments were just a little too personal. "You look beautiful today," instead of just nice. But I shrugged it off. I was a married woman, and he was my husband's best friend. There was a clear line, and I was sure we were both on the right side of it. James trusted Ethan completely. In fact, there were times I thought he trusted him more than he trusted himself. If James was ever unsure about something, a business decision, a personal issue, even a birthday gift for me, Ethan was his go-to. And Ethan always knew what to say, what to do. He was effortlessly helpful. Too helpful, maybe. But again, I ignored that little voice. The one that whispered things I didn't want to believe. The day everything started to shift didn't feel like anything special. It was a regular Tuesday. James was working late, and Ethan had stopped by to return something he borrowed. He ended up staying for dinner. We talked. We laughed. And for the first time, I noticed how easy it was to talk to him. How he listened, really listened, in a way James hadn't in a long time. When he left that night, I caught myself smiling. A little too long. And that's when the first crack appeared. Just a small one. Barely noticeable. But it was there. And cracks, as I would soon learn, don't go away on their own. They grow. It started with a breakup. Ethan had been dating someone for nearly 2 years. A woman named Claire. From the outside, they looked happy. But one evening, James came home with the news. Ethan and Claire were done. And it hadn't ended well. Apparently, she'd cheated on him, and he'd moved out with nowhere to go. I remember the way James looked at me that night. Concerned, empathetic, already preparing to offer something I hadn't agreed to yet. "Babe," he said gently, "I think Ethan needs a place to crash for a few weeks, just until he finds something else. He's not in a good place right now." I hesitated. Not because I didn't care, I did. But we had a quiet home, a rhythm, a sacred space that was ours. Bringing someone else into that space, even temporarily, felt like opening a door we'd never fully close again. Still, I agreed. It was the right thing to do. Ethan was practically family, and it was just for a little while, or so I thought. Within days, Ethan moved into our guest room with 2 duffel bags and a box of old records. He was polite, even overly respectful at first. Did the dishes after dinner. Offered to cook once in a while. Tried to stay out of the way. But over time, his presence shifted, not in any obvious way, but in the way he slowly became part of everything. James and Ethan slipped back into their college dynamic. Late-night beers, video games, laughing about things I didn't understand. I felt like the outsider in my own home sometimes. Other times, it felt like Ethan was trying to pull me in, too. He'd ask about my day, remember small things I said in passing, make inside jokes just between the two of us. There was a warmth in his attention, too warm, but subtle enough to ignore. It got harder when James started working late more often. He had just taken on a major project at work, which meant longer hours and more stress. I found myself home alone with Ethan more than I expected. We'd eat dinner together, watch a movie sometimes. Nothing inappropriate. But there was a closeness growing, soft, slow, almost innocent, but not quite. I remember one evening in particular. James had called to say he'd be staying overnight at the office. I was in the kitchen when Ethan walked in with 2 glasses of wine and that easy smile. We sat on the couch talking about music, travel, regrets. There was a moment of silence, the kind that isn't awkward but heavy with something unsaid. His eyes held mine just a little too long. I looked away. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was just tension from being under the same roof, that I missed my husband, that I was lonely. I told myself Ethan was just being kind. But deep down, a part of me knew the boundaries were fading. And once they blur, it's only a matter of time before someone crosses the line. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. Tiptoes in, disguised as kindness. That's how it felt with Ethan. He never said anything outright, never crossed a physical line, but the emotional intimacy between us had become undeniable. It started with little things, so small they could have been brushed off. But together, they formed a pattern that I could no longer ignore. Like how he remembered exactly how I took my coffee. Almond milk, 1 sugar, just a dash of cinnamon. He'd make it for me before I even came downstairs. Or how he noticed when I wore my hair a different way, even if James didn't. "That braid suits you," he'd say with a smile that lingered. He once brought home my favorite pastry from a bakery across town. Something I had mentioned in passing weeks before. I should have said something then, set a line, reinforced a boundary. But I didn't. Worse than the attention was how easy it became to confide in him. James was exhausted from work, barely present anymore, always distracted. But Ethan was there, always. He listened when I vented about my job, when I felt neglected, when I cried one night over something trivial that somehow didn't feel trivial at all. He didn't judge. He made me feel seen. Something I hadn't realized I was missing until he gave it to me. I tried to convince myself that it was just friendship. A deeper connection, sure, but nothing wrong. But there were signs I couldn't ignore. Like how he started standing closer than before. How his hand would brush mine when we reached for something at the same time. How his eyes seemed to search mine when I laughed, as if looking for something unspoken. Then there was that night we went to the grocery store together. James had asked us to pick up some things for dinner. We were walking down the aisle, laughing about something silly, when an older woman looked at us and smiled. "You two make a lovely couple," she said casually before walking off. I laughed awkwardly, ready to correct her, but Ethan didn't. He just looked at me, not with shock, but something else, something softer, something dangerously close to desire. It wasn't just the physical closeness. It was how emotionally entangled we'd become. I started looking forward to seeing him more than I should have. I found myself thinking about what shirt he'd wear, or how he smelled when he walked past me. And when James kissed me, I felt a flicker of guilt, because I had started to compare. But the worst part was, I hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet. There were no texts to delete, no secret rendezvous, no kisses exchanged. But in my heart, something had shifted, and it terrified me more than any physical act could. Because love and betrayal don't always begin with actions. Sometimes they start with thoughts you never meant to have. It was raining the night everything shifted. Not just outside, but inside me too. Like a quiet storm that had been brewing for weeks and was finally ready to break. James had been gone all day, working through the weekend again. I was curled up on the couch in my robe, reading a book I couldn't focus on, when Ethan came into the living room carrying a blanket and 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you might need something warm," he said. I smiled, thankful and hesitant. The room was dim, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows, and the house felt oddly intimate. Too quiet, too personal. Ethan sat beside me, a bit closer than usual. Not touching, but not leaving enough space either. We talked for a while, about silly things at first. Movies, music, childhood memories. But then the conversation turned deeper. He asked me if I was happy. Not just in life, in my marriage. The question caught me off guard. Of course, I said, almost reflexively. But the pause before I answered betrayed me. Ethan looked down at his mug. Sometimes I wonder, he said softly, what it would have been like if we had met first. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I could feel the weight of his words sitting in the room between us like a secret we both already knew. I wanted to stand, to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard him. But I didn't move. I'm sorry, he added quickly, eyes meeting mine. That was out of line. I've been feeling things I know I shouldn't. And I can't keep pretending like I don't. I should have shut it down. Right there. I should have told him it was wrong. That this wasn't a line we could even approach, let alone cross. But instead, I whispered, "Me too." The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the rain anymore. We didn't touch. We didn't kiss. But something irreversible happened in that moment. We let the words out, the feelings we had both buried under politeness and circumstance. The truth had cracked open, and it couldn't be sealed back. "I would never hurt James," Ethan said. "You know that, right?" "I know," I whispered, but we already had. That night I went to bed shaken. I lay next to my husband, who was exhausted and clueless, while my mind spun with guilt, confusion, and a sickening mix of desire and dread. I hadn't cheated. Not physically. But something about that felt like a technicality. Emotionally, I had already stepped outside the boundaries of my marriage. The lines had officially blurred, so quietly, so gently, that I couldn't even say when it truly began. But I knew it was only a matter of time before something more would happen. And deep down, a darker part of me wondered if I'd even try to stop it. It happened on a Thursday. James had left early that morning for a 3-day business trip out of state. His first since Ethan had moved in. I remember standing at the door, hugging him goodbye, feeling strangely detached. Not because I didn't love him, but because something inside me had shifted so far off-center that I didn't recognize myself anymore. I watched his car disappear down the street, and felt the kind of quiet I used to cherish now wrap around me like a warning. The day was uneventful. I worked from home, avoided the kitchen where Ethan was casually moving around, humming as he made lunch. We were polite, maybe even trying too hard to act normal. But the weight of what had been said between us, what had been admitted days earlier, sat in every glance, every pause. It was like walking around a room filled with gasoline, both of us holding matches. That evening, we ended up on the back porch. It was cool, breezy. He brought a bottle of wine. We sipped in silence for a while, watching the sky turn deep blue. We talked carefully at first, about life, regret, how complicated love can be. Then, slowly, the conversation dipped into more dangerous waters. "I hate that I feel this way," he said, voice low. "I never wanted to." I nodded, staring into my glass. "I know, but we let it happen." He looked at me then, really looked at me, the kind of gaze that leaves no room for pretending. "Tell me to stop and I will," he said. "Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll walk away." I should have said it. I should have stood up, gone inside, locked the door behind me. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "I can't." The kiss came fast, desperate, like two people finally giving in to a storm they'd been trying to outrun for weeks. It wasn't romantic or gentle. It was painful, heavy with guilt and longing. And before I could convince myself otherwise, the night spiraled into something I would carry with me forever. Afterwards, the silence between us was louder than any fight I'd ever had with James. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the room where it happened, and stared at the wall like it might somehow forgive me. "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly behind me. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but it had. And now it couldn't be undone." I slept in my own room before James returned. I changed the sheets. I erased every trace. But I couldn't erase the shame that clung to my skin. I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing the woman who had betrayed the man who loved her, with the man he trusted the most. That night became a memory I couldn't bury. A moment that didn't just cross the line, it burned it down. James returned from his business trip with flowers and a tired smile. He kissed my cheek and held me a little longer than usual, like he had missed me more than he could say. I smiled back and tried to make it look real, but inside, I was splintering. Everything felt off, not because he had changed, but because I had. I couldn't meet his eyes for more than a few seconds without feeling like I was suffocating. For the first few days, I overcompensated. I cooked elaborate dinners, asked about his meetings, touched his arm when I passed him in the hallway. I was trying to glue the pieces back together, but the cracks were already there, wide and deep, spreading with every unspoken truth. I caught myself flinching when he touched me unexpectedly, and once, when he reached for my hand in bed, I turned away and pretended to be asleep. James noticed. Of course, he did. He wasn't oblivious. He just trusted me too much to imagine what I had done. "You've been distant lately," he said one night while we were doing the dishes together. "I'm just tired," I replied quickly. "Work's been overwhelming." He nodded but didn't look convinced. I could feel him watching me when I walked away. Ethan, on the other hand, had changed in ways that were harder to ignore. He became moody, withdrawn, and sometimes strangely possessive. He avoided being alone with me for the first few days after that night, but then slowly started slipping back into my orbit. He'd brush against me in the kitchen. He'd linger in the hallway. And once, when James was in the shower, Ethan caught me alone and whispered, "Do you ever think about it? About us?" I wanted to scream at him, tell him to stop, to stay away, to leave before everything fell apart. But I didn't. I just stared at him, speechless, my heart pounding with a mix of fear, shame, and something even worse, temptation. One night, James suggested that Ethan start looking for his own place. "I think he's been here long enough," he said casually. "We all need a little space." I agreed too quickly. James narrowed his eyes. "Is there something I should know?" "No," I said too fast. "Of course not." But the damage was showing. The energy in the house had changed. Where there was once warmth and ease, there was now tension and silence. Ethan grew colder. He made snide comments under his breath. Once, he slammed a door so hard it shook the frame. James asked me if I thought Ethan was okay, and I could only nod weakly, not trusting my voice. Every moment felt like a balancing act, pretending to be the loving wife, while hiding the truth I knew could destroy everything. And the worst part? I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. My marriage was crumbling. Ethan was unraveling, and I was stuck in the middle, caught between guilt and desire, unable to fix what I had broken. Secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury them. I had been living with the weight of mine for weeks, pretending, smiling, kissing my husband goodnight, all while knowing the truth sat in the same house with us every day. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep, and worst of all, I couldn't look at James without seeing the betrayal behind my eyes. It finally happened on a Sunday afternoon. James had gone out to get groceries. Ethan was in the living room pacing. He had been acting more and more erratic lately, snapping at small things, watching me with a kind of possessiveness that made me anxious. That day, he was unusually quiet until suddenly he wasn't. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice breaking the silence. I turned to him slowly. "Do what?" "This. Hiding. Watching you pretend like nothing happened. Living under the same roof as him and lying to his face every day." My chest tightened. "Keep your voice down." "No," he said firmly. "He deserves to know." Panic flooded through me. "Ethan, please, don't do this like this." His eyes burned with something I couldn't quite name. Heartbreak, rage, desperation. "You were there too. It wasn't just me." "I know," I whispered. "But we can't fix this by blowing it up." But we were too late. We didn't hear the front door open. We didn't hear James step into the hallway. But we both heard his voice. "Fix what?" The sound of his voice made my heart stop. I turned slowly, And there he was, standing in the doorway holding a paper bag, his face pale and unreadable. His eyes bounced between me and Ethan, searching for answers he already knew but didn't want to believe. "Fix what exactly?" he repeated. No one said anything. The silence that followed was worse than yelling, worse than any insult or accusation. I felt like a child caught in the middle of a fire she started but didn't know how to put out. James's face changed. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. "What did you do?" he asked me. Then he turned to Ethan. "What did you do?" Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling. "Please let me explain." He didn't wait for an explanation. The bag dropped from his hand, spilling groceries onto the floor. Eggs shattered. A bottle of red wine rolled across the tiles and burst. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. "Get out," James said. His voice was cold, flat, the kind of tone you use when you're done, truly done. "Both of you. James, don't." He pointed at the door. "Get out of my house." That was the last thing he said before he walked away, disappearing into the bedroom and shutting the door. I stood there frozen, shattered in the middle of the wreckage I had helped create. Ethan picked up his keys and walked out without saying another word. And just like that, everything was broken. It's been 8 months since that day. The day everything came crashing down. 8 months since James looked at me like I was a stranger. 8 months since Ethan walked out of our lives, leaving behind a silence louder than any apology he could have offered. And still, I wake up some mornings unsure of who I am now. Unsure if I'm the villain, or just someone who lost her way. James and I didn't speak for the first few weeks. He moved into the guest room. I stayed in our bedroom, alone, surrounded by memories I had poisoned with one choice. I tried writing him a letter, but I never sent it. I tried texting him simple things. "How are you? Do you need anything?" But he left them unread. He was grieving not just a marriage, but the man he once called a brother, and the version of me he thought he knew. Eventually, he asked me to leave. I packed my things quietly, moving into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and peeling paint, but it became my space to breathe, to feel, to sit with everything I had done. I didn't try to chase Ethan. Whatever we had was born from pain, not love. It wasn't something worth saving, not at the cost of everything else. Some nights, I replay it all in my mind, searching for the moment where I could have changed things. Maybe if I had drawn a line sooner. Maybe if I had been more honest with James about how disconnected I was feeling. Maybe if I had been stronger when Ethan first confessed his feelings. But I've come to understand that love isn't about perfection. It's about responsibility. And I failed to protect what I should have fought for harder. I've been going to therapy, trying to understand not just what I did, but why I did it. I've realized that sometimes people stray not because they don't love their partner, but because they forget to love themselves in the right way. I was lonely, emotionally starved, and instead of confronting it, I reached for something that felt comforting, even when I knew it was wrong. James and I met for coffee last month. It was the first time we sat across from each other without bitterness hanging in the air. He looked tired, but lighter. We talked, not about getting back together, but about how we're healing in our own ways. I told him I was sorry, not to earn his forgiveness, but because he deserved to hear it. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll never find our way back to each other. Maybe we're both meant to start new chapters, separate from the pain we shared. But one thing is certain. I'll never make that mistake again. Because real love, the kind that endures, isn't built on excitement or temptation. It's built on trust. And once that's gone, sometimes all that's left is the lesson. 20.